500 people. One stage, one question, and 10 seconds of silence that broke a 22-year winning streak. When Harvard professor Dr. Renwick Hale stepped into the aisle of Sanders Theater and pointed his most dangerous question at a 19-year-old boy in a dark blue hoodie, he was certain of one thing. He was going to win. He had always won. But Damian Musk had been carrying the answer since he was 10 years old, and he was finally ready to put it down. The microphone let out a sharp squeal. Nobody laughed, nobody moved. 500 people sat inside Sanders Theater at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This was one of the most famous rooms in America. Presidents had spoken here. Nobel Prize winners had stood on this very stage. The ceiling curved high overhead, like the inside of a great wooden shell. Every sound carried, every breath carried. Even silence in this room had weight. And right now, every eye in that room was fixed on a boy. He was 19 years old, thin and a little uneven, the way some teenagers are when they haven't quite grown into their own frame yet. He wore a plain dark blue hoodie and jeans that were just slightly too long. His dark hair fell loose across his forehead. He looked like any other teenager you might pass on a street corner in any city in the world. Except he wasn't. His name was Damian Musk. And the man standing 15 feet away from him, a man in a pressed gray suit with a Harvard faculty pin on his lapel, had just asked him a question. In front of 500 people, under the full blaze of the stage lights, with a journalist's camera already recording from the back row. And the man's name was Dr. Renwick Hale. Dr. Hale was 53 years old. He had written 4 books on human intelligence. He held a PhD from Oxford and had taught at Harvard for 22 years. He had a voice that filled rooms without effort and a way of asking questions that made even confident people feel suddenly small. He was the kind of man who believed that real intelligence had to be earned, clawed out through years of sacrifice and struggle and sleepless nights. Not handed down, not inherited, not arrived at simply because of who your father happened to be. He had said so publicly, more than once. He had made it clear again, in a sharper and more pointed way, just 60 seconds ago. And now, the room was absolutely silent. 500 people were waiting. The moderator, a woman named Claire Ashford from the Harvard Office of Public Affairs, had her hand frozen halfway to her microphone. She had been about to step in. She was still deciding. Her face said she wasn't sure if she should. Damian Musk stood at the edge of the spotlight. He did not step back. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the floor. He looked directly at Dr. Renwick Hale. 1 second passed. 2, 3. A woman in seat C14, a retired schoolteacher from Providence named Dorothy Osei, who had driven 2 hours that morning to be here, held her breath without noticing she was doing it. She would tell her daughter that night that the air in the room felt thick and heavy, like something large and invisible was pressing down on all 500 of them at once. 4 seconds. 5. A boy in the back row slowly raised his phone, and he pressed record. 6. A Harvard dean seated in the faculty section leaned forward in his chair. 7. Something crossed Dr. Hale's face, just for a moment. The smallest flicker of something unexpected. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for fumbling. He had fully expected a boy born into wealth and a famous name to crumble under the weight of a real question asked in a real room. He had not prepared for this absolute, unperformed stillness. 8 seconds. 9. Claire Ashford's fingers closed around her microphone. 10. Damian Musk opened his mouth. What he said next took 4 words longer than a single breath. It was not a formula. It was not a statistic. It was not the kind of answer you find in any textbook Harvard has ever printed. But when he finished speaking, Dr. Renwick Hale, a man who had not been publicly silenced in 22 years of academic life, said absolutely nothing. He pressed his lips together. He looked down at the podium. And for 11 long seconds, in front of 500 witnesses, he did not speak. Then the room erupted. Some people stood. Some people cried. One veteran journalist from The Atlantic opened her notebook and wrote, "I have never seen anything like this. Not once. But here is what you don't know yet. You don't know what the question was. You don't know what the answer was. And you have no idea, not yet, what it truly cost that boy to say it." So, let's go back to the beginning. Damian Musk was born on January 1st, 2006. He was one of 3 babies, triplets. He came into the world alongside his brothers Kai and Saxon in a Los Angeles hospital, just after midnight on New Year's Day. His mother, Justine Wilson, said years later that it felt like beginning a new world and starting a new year at the exact same moment, as if the universe had arranged the timing on purpose just to make a point. Elon Musk was already famous by then. Tesla was growing fast. SpaceX had already launched its first rockets into the sky above the Mojave Desert. The name Musk was appearing in headlines across the world. But Damian didn't know any of that for a long time. He was just a kid in a big house with 2 brothers who fought over the same video game controllers and ate the same cereal every morning out of the same oversized bowls. His parents divorced when he was very young. He grew up mostly with his mother in Bel Air, California, though he attended a small private school called the West Side Academy. Not a school that ever made news, not a school where anyone expected history to be made. It was the kind of school with a nice courtyard and good teachers, and a library that smelled like old carpet and new paper at the same time. What people who knew Damian as a child remembered most about him was not that he was fast, not that he was loud, not that he raised his hand first. They remembered that he was quiet, not shy quiet, not sad quiet, listening quiet. "Most children cannot wait to speak," said his 4th grade teacher, Ms. Priya Nair, who would go on to become one of the most important people in his life. They raise their hand before the question is even finished. Damian waited until he understood. Really understood. It was the most unusual thing I had ever seen in a 9-year-old. By the time he was 9, Damian had read every book in his school's science section. Not because a teacher had assigned them, not because his father had told him to, because he wanted to. Because books felt like the one place where nobody looked at his last name before deciding how smart he was. One afternoon, he checked out a book on astrophysics from the library shelf. A thick, dense book meant for college students, full of equations and long words and diagrams of things that existed millions of light years away. He returned it 2 weeks later with 6 pages of notes written carefully in the margins. The school librarian, a warm woman named Mrs. Okonkwo, held the book for a moment after he handed it back. Then she called his mother. I just want to make sure he's all right," Mrs. Okonkwo said carefully. "This isn't normal reading for a 9-year-old." Justine had smiled on the other end of the phone. "He's perfectly fine," she said. "This is just Damian." But Damian did not always feel fine. He understood his father's name before he truly understood what his father did. And when he did begin to understand, when the other kids at school started saying things like, "Your dad owns a rocket company and your dad is the richest person on earth," he felt something strange settle into his chest. Something heavy and quiet and difficult to name. He felt invisible. Not because people didn't see him. They saw him constantly. They looked at him the moment he walked into any room. But when they looked at him, they looked straight through him, all the way to his last name. They never actually arrived at him. They stopped halfway. A boy named Marcus Del Rey, the loudest kid in 5th grade, the one who always sat in the back row and laughed the hardest and longest at his own jokes, walked up to Damian at recess one afternoon and said it plainly, the way only children say things that adults are careful to dress up differently. "You're not actually smart," Marcus said. "You just have money." He said it without cruelty. That was somehow the worst part. He said it the way you state a fact you learned from somewhere reliable. He had heard it from someone older, somewhere, and he had believed it, and now he was passing it along. Damian did not answer. He walked away from Marcus and crossed the soccer field and sat down with his back against the chain-link fence at the far edge of the yard, and he pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He always carried a notebook, had since he was 8, and he wrote something down. He was 10 years old. He sat there until the recess bell rang. Then he stood up, put the notebook back in his pocket, and walked inside. Nobody at that school knew what he had written. Nobody would know for 9 more years. Not until a journalist from Time magazine, sitting in a quiet coffee shop in Santa Monica, asked him about that moment, and watched his face change in a way that had nothing to do with performance. He would confirm that yes, he remembered the chain-link fence. Yes, he remembered Marcus. Yes, he remembered what he wrote. And then he would say that it was the day he made a decision that would take 9 years to fully carry out, a decision that would be completed. At last, in full, in 10 seconds, on a stage in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in front of 500 silent people and a camera that was already recording. But that is still ahead of us. For now, he was just a boy with a notebook, standing up from a fence, walking back inside. The call came on a Thursday morning in February 2026. Damian was sitting at the kitchen table of his mother's house in Bel Air. He was eating toast and reading a paper on neuroplasticity that had been published in Nature Neuroscience 2 days earlier. He was 19 years old. He had deferred his college enrollment for a gap year, not to travel, not to rest, but to read. To finally read everything he had never had enough hours to read during school. He had a handwritten list of 114 papers and books. He was on number 67. His phone buzzed against the table. The screen read, "Jonas Webb, Dad's office." Jonas Webb was Elon's chief of staff. He was 41 years old, calm and precise in the way that people become when they spend years managing chaos from the inside. He communicated mostly in short sentences. He had a gift for making enormous complicated things sound simple and manageable, which was possibly the most valuable skill a person could have when working for Elon Musk. Damian liked Jonas. Jonas never spoke to him like a child. He also never spoke to him like a celebrity. He just spoke to him like a person, which was rarer than it should have been. "Good morning, Damian," Jonas said. "I'll keep it brief. You've been invited to speak at the Harvard Youth Intelligence and Innovation Symposium on March 14th. Your father believes you should attend, and the organizing committee has asked specifically for a young voice on the panel. The session is about the future of human potential." Damian set his toast down. "Harvard," he said. It wasn't quite a question. Sanders Theater, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Audience of roughly 500. Faculty, researchers, journalists, and invited young scholars. It's a significant room. Who else is on the panel? Jonas listed 4 names. 3 were professors. One was a 15-year-old mathematics prodigy from South Korea named Min Jun-yoon, who had already published 2 peer-reviewed academic papers, a fact that Damian found immediately more interesting than anything else Jonas had said. And then Jonas added, "Dr. Renwick Hale will also be present. He's delivering the keynote address." The kitchen went quiet. Not because anything changed in the room. The refrigerator still hummed. A car passed slowly on the street outside. The morning light still came through the window at the same angle it always did. But something shifted behind Damian's eyes. He knew that name. Anyone who had spent serious time reading about intelligence research knew that name. Dr. Renwick Hale was not a minor figure. He was one of the most respected and most debated voices in the academic world on the subject of human cognitive potential. His books were assigned at universities across 6 countries. His lectures sold out. He had also, in October 2024, written a long essay in The Atlantic titled "The Myth of Inherited Genius." The piece was carefully argued and extensively researched. It made a pointed case that modern society had developed a dangerous habit of mistaking proximity to power and wealth for actual intellectual ability, of celebrating performance over substance, of handing platforms to people who had connections rather than capacity. He had not written Damian's name anywhere in the article. He hadn't needed to. 3 separate people had sent Damian the link within 24 hours of it going live. He had read it once quickly and then twice more slowly, the way he read things that mattered. He had underlined nothing. He had written nothing in the margins. He had simply read it, closed the tab, and sat still for a while. "Does my father know Hale is giving the keynote?" Damian asked. "He does," Jonas said. "He still thinks you should go." A pause. "So what does my mother think?" Jonas's voice shifted slightly, just a degree warmer. "She said it's entirely your decision. She also said, and I'm quoting her directly here, 'Tell Damian that the only honest answer to people who doubt you is to show up.'" Damian looked at his toast. It had gone cold. He thought about a soccer field, a chain-link fence, a 10-year-old boy sitting alone with a notebook, writing something down that nobody else had ever read. He thought about a decision he had made 9 years ago. "Tell them yes," he said. He said it quietly. No drama. No pause for effect. Just the words, placed down like something solid and final. Jonas said he would confirm immediately and send the logistics by end of day. The call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds in total. Damian set the phone face down on the table, and he looked at his reading list, still open beside his plate. Number 67. A paper on how the brain rewires itself in response to challenge and pressure. How difficulty, met directly, changes the actual physical structure of the mind. He picked up his pen. He drew a small star next to number 67. Then he turned the page and started reading again. Dr. Renwick Hale had never lost a public debate. Not once. Not in 22 years. He had debated economists at the London School of Economics. He had debated neuroscientists at Johns Hopkins. He had debated sitting politicians on live television in front of audiences of millions. And he had walked away from every single one of those encounters with the argument still intact, and the other person slightly smaller than when they had started. On one particularly memorable evening at the Oxford Union in 2019, he had debated a former director of the CIA on the subject of institutional intelligence, whether organizations could think, and had won so cleanly that the audience had given him a standing ovation before the moderator could close the session. He was brilliant. There was no honest way around that word. But brilliance, like most powerful things, can carry edges you don't always see until something gets cut. Dr. Hale had grown up in Akron, Ohio. His father, a man named Gerald Hale, had worked the line at a Goodyear tire factory for 31 years. His mother, Patricia, had cleaned offices 3 evenings a week and worked the checkout at a grocery store on weekends. There had been no money for tutors, no summer enrichment programs, no family friends who sat on university boards or made phone calls on your behalf, no safety net of any kind. Renwick had earned every single credential through the kind of effort that leaves permanent marks on a person. Late nights that turned into early mornings. Scholarships applied for with shaking hands. Years of eating badly and sleeping on uncomfortable mattresses in cheap apartments near campus because the alternative was going home and admitting that the distance between Akron and Oxford was too great to cross. He had crossed it anyway, and that journey, every hard mile of it, had made him who he was. It had given him his discipline, his precision, his refusal to accept easy answers to complicated questions. It had also given him something else, and something he carried so deeply inside himself that he had stopped noticing it was there, the way you stop noticing the weight of a coat you have worn every single day for 20 years. He could not fully trust what he had not watched someone earn. His close friend and longtime colleague, Professor Diane Osei, from the MIT Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences, had seen it clearly for years. She was one of the few people in the world who could say difficult things to Renwick Hale and have him actually listen. At a faculty dinner in Boston 2 months before the symposium, a quiet evening at a restaurant on Newbury Street, just the two of them, the kind of dinner old friends have where the conversation moves slowly and goes deep. She had set down her glass and looked at him directly. "Renwick," she said, "see, your anger at unearned privilege is legitimate. I've always believed that. But I need you to be careful that you don't start seeing inheritance everywhere you look. Sometimes a child is simply gifted. Full stop. No child from that world has ever been tested fairly," he said. "The platform always arrives before the proof." "You haven't tested him at all," she said. He smiled, just slightly. The kind of smile that arrives before a decision has been spoken aloud. "Not yet," he said. Diane Osei picked up her glass and looked at him for a long moment over the rim. She did not smile back. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Hale did what he always did before something that mattered. He read everything. He found 2 essays Damian had published in an online journal called The Young Mind Review, a small publication, not widely read, but serious in its intentions. He found a short paper on the limitations of standardized testing that had been quietly passing between academics for several months, shared in the particular underground way that interesting ideas circulate before the mainstream catches on. He read all of it carefully, twice. What he found unsettled him in a way he did not share with anyone. The essays were good, genuinely good, not polished by a tutor good, not impressive for his age good. Good in the way that ideas are good when they come from someone who has actually sat alone with a question long enough to find something real inside it. The paper on standardized testing was sharper still. It didn't simply argue that the tests were flawed. Any undergraduate could make that argument. It argued from inside the research, and it held the existing studies up to their own standards and found the places where the methodology failed on its own terms. That was a rare thing. Hale knew exactly how rare. He told nobody he was impressed. He also told nobody, not Diane Osei, not any of his graduate students, not his department chair, that he had already decided to challenge Damian Musk directly at the symposium, that he had a question prepared, that he had been shaping and refining it for 11 days the way a craftsman refines something that needs to be exactly right. The question was not about mathematics. It was not about science. It was something older and more dangerous than either of those things. It was the kind of question that has no correct answer sitting in any textbook, which meant there was no way to fake one, no way to reach for something memorized and dress it up as original thought. He believed, with the calm certainty of a man who had seen this pattern many times before, that Damian would not find an answer. He believed that the boy would stand in the light of that stage and show the world exactly what Hale had long suspected. He was about to find out what it felt like to be completely and permanently wrong. Sanders Theater is one of the most beautiful rooms in America. It was built in 1876, during a time when people believed that the spaces where ideas were shared should be made with the same care and intention as the ideas themselves. The wood is dark and old and warm. The balconies curve around the stage in a wide, generous arc, like two arms wrapping slowly around the room. The ceiling rises high and vaulted overhead. When you stand at the center of that stage and look out at the seats, the faces seem to rise toward you in layered waves, row after row, climbing gently upward into the dark. Every sound carries in that room. Every silence carries more. Damian Musk arrived at Sanders Theater at 8:47 in the morning on March 14, 2026. He came alone. He had asked Jonas Webb not to arrange a security team. He had asked his father not to attend. Both requests had taken some back and forth, but he had held firm on both. This was important to him in a way he found difficult to fully explain, but felt with complete certainty. He needed to walk into this room as himself, not as a protected person, not as someone being managed and guided and watched over, not as Elon Musk's son, just as Damian. Elon had agreed, and in the particular way Elon agreed to things, not warmly, not with reassurance, but with a single text sent at 7 in the morning that read, "Don't perform, just think. That's always enough." Damian had read it in the back of an Uber crossing the Anderson Memorial Bridge over the Charles River. The water below was gray and flat, and very still. A single rowing crew was out on the river despite the cold. 8 rowers and a coxswain moving in perfect practiced unison through the pale morning air. 8 people who had trained the same movement 10,000 times so that on the day it mattered, it would require no thought at all. He watched them until the bridge ended. He put his phone in his jacket pocket. He looked straight ahead. The symposium opened at 10 o'clock. The first 2 hours were panel discussions, structured, moderated, and the kind of academic conversation that moves carefully and builds slowly. Damian sat at the long table on stage with the other panelists. Min Jun-yoon, the 15-year-old Korean mathematician, turned out to be warm and quietly funny, and genuinely terrible at small talk in the green room, which Damian found immediately endearing. Dr. Sylvie Marchetti, Harvard's Dean of Student Research, had the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of actually caring about the work, rather than just the reputation of it. Dr. Kofi Abara from Johns Hopkins had an enormous, unguarded laugh that filled the green room twice before the session even started, and made everyone in it feel slightly more human. And then there was Amara Weru. Amara was 17 years old. She had come from Nairobi, Kenya, where she had spent the last 2 years conducting independent research on soil carbon levels across sub-Saharan agricultural land. Her data was meticulous. Her presentation, delivered without notes, was so precise and so quietly passionate, so full of genuine love for the work itself, that when she finished, 500 people rose to their feet before the moderator could even reach for the microphone. Damian stood with them. He wrote one line in his notebook during her applause. Certainty built on real evidence is more powerful than certainty built on reputation. He underlined it twice. Dr. Renwick Hale delivered his keynote address at 11:15 in the morning. It was 40 minutes long. He spoke without a single note, and he moved across the stage with the quiet authority of someone who has spent decades understanding exactly how a room works and how to work with it. His argument was about intelligence. What it truly is, what it demonstrably is not. How the tools we use to measure it have failed us in ways we have barely begun to honestly reckon with. He cited Robert Sternberg's research on multiple intelligences. He cited Claude Steele's landmark studies on stereotype threat. The way that the mere awareness of being judged by a stereotype is enough to measurably suppress performance, regardless of actual ability. He pulled data from Stanford, from MIT, from University College London. He built his case the way the best architects build, not by stacking impressive pieces on top of each other, but by finding the right foundation first and letting everything rise from it naturally, so that by the end, the structure felt not constructed, but inevitable. Damian took notes through the entire address. He filled 2 pages. He agreed with almost everything Hale said. That was the part he hadn't expected. He had come to Cambridge prepared to find the gaps in Hale's thinking. He had spent weeks reading the man's work, with the specific intention of understanding where the argument broke down. But sitting in that chair, under those lights, listening, he kept nodding. Hale was right about the measurement. He was right about the damage the measurement had caused. He was right that society had spent more than a century confusing performance with intelligence and intelligence with privilege and privilege with worth. And he was right about all of it. Damian wrote one more line at the bottom of his second page, and he pressed down slightly harder with the pen than he normally did, the way you do when something needs to stay. It read, "He's right about the system, but he's using the right argument to make the wrong judgment." He capped his pen. He looked up at the stage. Dr. Hale was receiving his applause, and in the aisle to the left of the faculty section, already moving to the position he had chosen, standing, not seated, 10 feet from the stage, angled so he could face both the panel and the audience at once, Dr. Renwick Hale was preparing to ask the question he had spent 11 days shaping into something sharp enough to cut through everything. He did not know that the boy at the panel table had already seen the blade. He did not know that the boy had been ready for it for 9 years. The afternoon session was 45 minutes away, the most important 45 minutes of both their lives. The lunch break lasted exactly 43 minutes. Damian spent most of it at a corner table in the faculty dining room with Amara and Minjun. They talked the way young people talk when they are genuinely curious about each other and haven't yet learned to be careful with it. Openly, quickly, overlapping each other's sentences without apology. They talked about consciousness and whether machines could ever truly possess it or only ever simulate the shape of it. They talked about what it actually felt like to be young and expected to have answers to questions that entire generations of adults had failed to solve. Do you feel the pressure?" Amara asked Damian directly. She had a way of asking things that left no space for a safe answer. "Of being who you are, I mean. Your name. All of it." "Every single day," Damian said. She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. "What do you do with it?" He thought about it for a moment. Not performing thoughtfulness, actually thinking. "I read," he said, "and I try to ask a better question today than I asked yesterday." Minjun laughed, a short, bright sound. "That is either the wisest thing I have heard all week," he said, "or the most exhausting." "It's both," Damian said. "Most honest things are." At 1:47 in the afternoon, Claire Ashford appeared at the edge of the dining room. Though she moved through the tables with the contained urgency of someone carrying information they are not entirely comfortable carrying. She stopped beside Damian's chair and bent down slightly, dropping her voice. "We're resuming in 8 minutes," she said. Then she paused. "Also, Dr. Hale has made a request. He's asked to direct a question specifically to one of the panelists during the open Q&A. Another pause, smaller this time. He's asked for it to be directed to you." The table went quiet. Amara set her glass down without drinking from it. "Did he say what the question is?" Damian asked. "No," Claire said. "He described it as a question about intelligence. He said you would find it straightforward." She said the last word carefully, in a tone that made clear she did not entirely believe it. Damian looked at the table for a moment, at his notebook, lying closed beside his plate. "You don't have to agree," Amara said. Her voice was quiet and certain. "You are allowed to simply say no." "I know," he said. He looked up at Claire Ashford. "Tell him yes," he said. The afternoon session opened at 2 o'clock. The room filled faster than it had that morning. Word had moved through the building the way word always moves in academic spaces, through corridor conversations and brief text messages, and the particular charged whisper that travels between people who sense that something is about to happen without being able to say exactly what or why. Claire Ashford opened the Q&A at 2:34 p.m. She reminded the audience of the guidelines. Questions should be specific. Panelists retained the right to decline. The session would run until 4 o'clock. She did not mention Dr. Hale's request. She did not need to. He was already standing. During the lunch break, he had moved from the faculty seating section to a position in the aisle, standing, not seated, 10 feet from the edge of the stage, angled precisely so that he faced both the panel and the audience at once. It was a deliberate choice, a tactical one. Standing while the panelists were seated changed the geometry of the room in small but meaningful ways. He had used this positioning before. He understood exactly what it communicated. Several journalists noticed immediately. 2 of them uncapped their pens. The boy in the back row, who had been half asleep through most of the morning session, was now sitting completely upright. Claire nodded toward the aisle. "Dr. Hale," she said, "you have the floor." "Thank you, to Claire." His voice moved through the room without effort. Smooth and full and completely unhurried, the way a river moves when it has a long way to go and knows it. He turned toward the panel table. He looked at Damian. "I'd like to direct my question to the youngest panelist," he said. "Mr. Musk." 500 faces turned. Damian sat still, both hands flat on the table in front of him. His notebook was closed. His pen was set down. His back was straight, but not stiff. He looked, in that moment, like someone who had already traveled through the hardest part of something long before arriving at the room. "Of course," Damian said. Dr. Hale paused. He was masterful with pauses. He used them the way composers use rests, not as empty space, but as shape, as intention. "Much has been said today," he began, "said about what intelligence is and what it is not, about how it is measured, about the ways those measurements have caused damage that we are still failing to fully account for. I have argued, and I believe the research supports this argument firmly, that the systems we use to evaluate human intelligence are broken in ways that run deeper than most people are willing to admit, that they reward access, that they reward opportunity, that they reward the appearance of ability rather than its substance." He let that settle across the room like something laid down carefully on a flat surface. "So, here is my question for you, Mr. Musk. Every person in Sanders Theater stopped breathing at the same moment. Not as a choice, as a reflex. The way 500 bodies respond when the air in a room changes all at once. In your view, Dr. Renwick Hale said, "What is the single greatest obstacle to human intelligence?" He clasped his hands behind his back. He waited. 1 second. 2. A woman in the 4th row pressed her palms flat against her knees. 3 seconds. A reporter glanced at his phone and immediately looked back up, embarrassed by the impulse. 4. The Harvard dean in the faculty section leaned so far forward that the person beside him noticed and leaned forward too, without meaning to. 5 seconds. Min Jun-yoon, 2 chairs to Damian's left, glanced sideways at him. Amara Weru, 2 chairs to his right, did not glance. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her and her hands completely still in her lap. She was holding her breath so carefully it was almost its own kind of prayer. 6. Dr. Hale's jaw moved. Just once. Just slightly. To a hairline fracture in the composed surface of his expression. He had expected the boy to begin speaking before the count of 3. Nervousness fills silence. That is what nervousness does. It cannot help itself. He had expected the silence to be filled immediately with fumbling, with the sound of someone reaching for an answer they did not have. He had not expected this stillness, this complete, unperformed, unafraid stillness. 7 seconds. 8. The boy in the back row raised his phone. He pressed record. 9. Claire Ashford's fingers closed around her microphone. She had made the decision. She was going to step in. She was going to offer to rephrase, to give another panelist the floor, to do something. Anything. And to release the pressure that had built so completely in this room that it had become almost unbearable to sit inside. Her thumb moved toward the button. 10 seconds. Damian Musk opened his mouth. And what he said, 12 words. 4 words longer than a single breath, spoken quietly and without any performance at all. Dropped across that room like something falling from a very great height into perfectly still water. It did not land loudly. It landed completely. Dr. Renwick Hale's hands, clasped behind his back, slowly released. His shoulders dropped, by the smallest fraction, the way a building settles. His mouth closed. He looked down at the floor. For 11 seconds, in front of 500 witnesses and a camera that was already recording. And the man who had not been publicly silenced in 22 years of academic life said absolutely nothing at all. Then the room came apart at the seams. But you still don't know what Damian said. And that is not an accident. Because before those 12 words can mean what they truly mean, you need to understand what it cost him to find them. How long he had carried them. Where they actually came from. The answer did not begin in Sanders Theater. It began 9 years earlier, at a chain-link fence, in a notebook that nobody else had ever read. The video went live at 4:23 in the afternoon, Eastern Time, on March 14, 2026. It was posted first to X, the platform Damian's father had purchased for $44 billion in October 2022, in a deal that had dominated news cycles for months and been called everything from visionary to reckless, depending on who you asked. The account that posted the clip had 11,000 followers. Within 3 hours, that number would be entirely irrelevant. The clip ran 2 minutes and 40 seconds. It began the moment Dr. Hale stepped into the aisle. It ended 4 seconds after the room erupted. The boy in the back row had kept his hand steady the whole time. His name was Tobias Gerand, He was 22 years old, a second-year graduate student in the Harvard Education Department. He had almost not come to the symposium that day. He had a paper due the following morning and had told himself he would stay for an hour at most. He stayed for everything. He posted the video without a caption. He didn't know what caption would be adequate. He simply posted it and closed his phone and sat for a while in the emptying theater, thinking. By 6 o'clock that evening, the clip had been viewed 6 million times. By midnight, 43 million. By the following morning, it was on the front page of the New York Times website. It was on the BBC. It was in Le Monde in Paris and the Times of India in Mumbai, and on the homepage of 17 other major publications across 9 countries. It had been translated, clipped, reposted, and discussed in languages Tobias Giron did not speak, in places he had never visited, by people who had never heard of Sanders Theater until the night before. On The Guardian ran the headline, "Musk's son silences Harvard. Professor with answer nobody expected." The Washington Post was more careful. A 19-year-old's response at Harvard sparks global debate about intelligence, privilege, and what we are actually testing. Social media was neither careful nor measured. It never is. It moved the way social media always moves when something real touches something raw. Fast and loud and in every direction at once, with enormous heat and very little agreement about what had actually happened or what it meant. Some people said Damian was a generational mind. Some said the entire thing was rehearsed. Some said they had never been moved by anything they had seen on a screen in years. Some said they didn't understand what everyone was so emotional about, that it was just a boy saying a sentence, and the world needed to settle down. Elon Musk posted nothing for 36 hours. Then, at 11:17 on the night of March 15th, a single sentence appeared on his X profile. "I always knew he'd find his own way." It was retweeted 600,000 times before morning. Justine Wilson did not post anything publicly. Instead, she called her son. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. She would say to a close friend, weeks later, that she had cried for 23 of those minutes. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain. The other kind. The kind that arrives when something you have hoped for quietly and privately, and without ever fully saying it aloud. Hoped for across years of school runs and late nights and report cards, and a boy sitting alone at a chain-link fence, finally steps into the light and becomes real in the world. Dorothy Ossie drove home to Providence in the dark. She was 71 years old. She had taught school for 38 years. She had watched hundreds of young people stand in front of rooms and try to become something. She had seen many of them succeed. She had seen some of them fail. She had seen almost all of them, in one way or another, perform. What she had watched Damian Musk do inside Sanders Theater was not a performance. She knew the difference. After 38 years of teaching children, you know the difference the same way you know when rain is coming. Not from any forecast, but from something older than that. Something your body knows before your mind catches up. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. She was thinking about a question she had not been able to put down since the moment she heard the answer. Not the question Dr. Hale had asked. The question underneath it. The one the boy had actually answered. Here is what you need to know before you hear the words. Damian Musk was 9 years old the first time he read about IQ tests, not because a teacher had assigned it, not because his father had suggested it. He had found the book himself, on the bottom shelf of the West Side Academy Library, pushed back slightly behind 2 other books, as if it had been trying to keep a low profile. It was called The Mismeasure of Man. written by the paleontologist and evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, and published in 1981. It was one of the most important and most argued-over critiques of intelligence testing ever put into print. And it was not a book written for 9-year-olds. Damian read the whole thing. He didn't understand every word. He understood enough. He understood that for more than a century, human beings had been trying to take one of the most vast and mysterious and poorly understood things in the known universe, the intelligence of a human mind, and press it down into a single number. And that this number had been used over and over and over again across generations to decide who deserved opportunity and who did not, who was worth investing in, who should be given the room to grow, and who should be quietly redirected somewhere smaller. He understood that the number had very often been wrong. He understood that the people told the number had placed them in the lesser category had, in case after case after case, gone on to do things that no number had predicted and no system had prepared for. He was 9 years old. He sat at a library table with the book open in front of him and a pencil in his hand, and he wrote in his notebook, in the careful, slightly uneven handwriting of a 9-year-old who was used to writing more than his hand could keep up with. Why do we measure things we don't understand yet, and then trust the measurement more than the thing itself? He stared at that sentence for a long time. Then he closed the notebook and put it in his bag and walked out into the afternoon. He was 10 when Marcus Del Rey told him he wasn't actually smart. He walked to the chain-link fence at the far edge of the soccer field and sat down with his back against it and opened his notebook. He stayed there until the bell rang. When he stood up and walked back inside, there was something written on the page that had not been there before. It was not angry. It was not defensive. It was not the kind of thing a hurt child writes when they want the world to know they have been hurt. It was a decision. It read, "I am going to spend my whole life learning what I don't know yet." That is the only honest answer to anyone who thinks they already know what I am. He was 10 years old. He did not show it to anyone. He was 15 when his father sent the birthday text. The most dangerous thing in the world is someone who thinks they already know enough. He read it 7 times, not because it was hard to understand, because it was the same thing he had written in his notebook at 10 years old, in different words, yet arriving now from a completely different direction, from a man who had built rockets and electric cars and who ran 5 companies simultaneously and who was not, by any honest measure, an easy person to have as a father, but who had, somehow, in 7 words, pointed at the exact same place Damian had found alone at a chain-link fence 5 years earlier. He lay on his back on his bedroom floor for a while after reading it. He was not sure if that made him feel less alone or more. Perhaps both. Perhaps that was the point. He was 17 when he wrote the paper on standardized testing. He was 18 when Serena Polk told him he was going to make people uncomfortable, and he asked her if that was bad, and she said no, that it was in fact the most important thing a mind could do. And he was 19 when he sat in a chair in Sanders Theater and listened to Dr. Renwick Hale build the most careful and thorough and genuinely brilliant argument Damian had ever heard delivered from a stage, and agreed with almost every word of it. Because here is the thing that Dorothy Osey had felt in seat C14 without being able to fully name. Here is the question underneath the question. Here is what the boy had actually answered. Dr. Hale was right about the system. Completely, demonstrably, research-supportably right. The measuring tools were broken. The tests rewarded the wrong things. The damage was real, and it was deep, and it had been running for generations. But Dr. Hale had done something with that correct understanding that transformed it into an error. And he had looked at a broken system a system that judged people by the wrong things and used it to build a wall. A clean, firm wall between the people he believed had earned their intelligence through suffering and the people he had decided, before asking a single question or reading a single word, had not. And in building that wall, he had done the precise thing he had spent his entire career arguing against. He had used a flawed measurement to judge a person. He had looked at Damian Musk's last name and his father's money and the gleaming size of the platform that had been offered to him. And he had decided what the answer would be before the question had even been asked. That was what Damian understood, sitting in that chair, that nobody else in the room fully saw yet. That was what 10 seconds of silence was. Not nerves. See, not searching for words he didn't have. Not the freeze of a boy out of his depth. He already had the words. He had carried them for 9 years, written first in the uncertain handwriting of a 10-year-old at a chain-link fence, and sharpened quietly and without audience every day since. The silence was something else entirely. It was the pause of someone deciding, for the last time, and with total calm, to stop carrying the answer alone. So here is what Damian Musk said, in the silence of Sanders Theater, under the full weight of those lights, in front of 500 people and a camera that was already recording. 12 words, spoken without anger, without performance, without any need for the room's approval at all. He looked directly at Dr. Renwick Hale, and he said, "The belief that we already understand enough to judge someone else's." 12 words. They arrive the way certain true things arrive. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the particular weight of something that has been carried a long way before being set down. You felt them land, not in your mind first, somewhere lower and older than your mind, in the place where you keep the things you have always known but never had the right words for, until someone else found them and handed them back to you. It was not an accusation. It was something more precise and more permanent than an accusation. It was a mirror, held up steadily, without malice, by a boy who had spent 9 years learning how. Dr. Renwick Hale stood in the aisle of Sanders Theater for 11 seconds after Damian finished speaking. In 22 years of public life, he had always known what to say next. Always. That was not arrogance. It was simply the truth of who he was and what he had built himself into through decades of relentless preparation. Words had never failed him. Not once. They failed him now. He looked at the boy at the table. The boy looked back. There was no triumph in Damian's expression, no satisfaction, no performance of victory. There was only something open and steady and completely clear, the way a clean window is clear, where you don't see the glass at all, only what lies beyond it. Hale looked down at the floor. For 11 seconds he was quiet. Then the room came apart. 4 days later, Dr. Renwick Hale released a written statement. He had written it himself without assistance. See, and it showed. It had the particular texture of something written by a person sitting alone with a hard truth, finding the honest words one at a time. He wrote that he had arrived at Sanders Theater prepared to ask a difficult question, that he had been entirely unprepared for the answer. Not because the answer exceeded his understanding, he wrote that plainly, without false modesty, but because he had understood it immediately and completely. And in understanding it, he had been forced to recognize that Damian Musk had said something Hale himself had written, in different words, in every book he had ever published, and that the boy had said it back to him at the exact moment Hale was doing the very thing he had built a career arguing against. He said he owed the boy and the audience an honest acknowledgement of that. Nothing more, so nothing less. The statement was shared across the world. It was called, by many observers, one of the most genuinely gracious things any public intellectual had done in recent memory. Not because admitting error is rare, though it is, but because he had admitted it without burying it in qualification. He had just said it. Plainly. The way Damian had said his 12 words. Plainly. Without armor. Min Jun-yoon texted Damian the night the statement went live. A person who is wrong about something and admits it clearly is more interesting than a person who is never wrong. I think you gave him something today, too. Damian read it twice. Then he typed back, I think you're right. I think I needed to give it as much as he needed to hear it. He set his phone down. He opened his notebook to a fresh page. He wrote one line at the top. Then he picked up the paper he had been reading before all of this began, number 67 on a list of 114, and he kept going. Outside, the world was still talking. Inside, a boy was still learning. That was the only answer he had ever really needed to give. 6 weeks after Sanders Theater, a journalist from Time magazine drove to Santa Monica to meet Priya Nair. Her name was Cécile Arnaud. She was 44 years old, French-born, 20 years into a career of interviewing people who had done remarkable things and finding the ordinary human truth underneath the remarkable thing. She was good at her job. She was patient, and she was quiet. And she knew from long experience that the most important thing a journalist can do in a room with another person is simply stop talking and wait. Yoshi met Priya at a small cafe 3 blocks from the ocean. It was a Tuesday morning in late April. The light came through the window in long, warm strips. The coffee was good. Outside, a man was teaching his young daughter to ride a bicycle on the wide, flat sidewalk, holding the back of the seat, and then, at the right moment, letting go. Cécile set her recorder on the table. She asked Priya what she had thought when she watched the video. Priya wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She looked out the window at the man and the bicycle and the little girl. She was quiet for long enough that Cécile did not try to fill the silence. Then Priya said, I thought about a 9-year-old boy in a library. She paused. Reading a book he had no business understanding. Taking notes in the margins. Trying to figure out why the world kept measuring things it didn't understand, and then trusting the measurement more than the actual thing. She paused again. I thought about how long he has been working on that question, quietly, without anyone watching, without any audience to perform for. She turned from the window. People are calling it a 10-second answer, she said. I need you to understand something. That was not a 10-second answer. Cécile waited. That was a 10-year answer, Priya said. He just delivered it in 10 seconds. The recorder ran. The light moved. Outside, the little girl wobbled and steadied and wobbled again, and her father kept his hand close to the seat without touching it, ready to catch her, not needing to. Cécile asked one more question. She asked, What do you think he does now? Priya smiled. And it was a small smile, private in the way that smiles are private when they belong to real knowledge rather than public performance. The same thing he has always done, she said. He opens the next book. He writes the next question. He goes further in. She looked at her coffee. That's the thing people missed watching that video. They thought the 10 seconds was the point. The 10 seconds was just the surface. Underneath it, all that time, there has been a boy who was more interested in the question than in being seen asking it. She looked up. That is the rarest thing I have ever come across in a person. At any age. Cécile drove back to her hotel along the Pacific Coast Highway. She passed the Anderson Memorial Bridge. She passed the mouth of the Charles River. She passed all the ordinary landmarks of an ordinary afternoon, a moving at ordinary speed, the radio playing something she wasn't quite listening to. She thought about a boy with a notebook. She thought about 9 years of asking better questions. She thought about the moment when all of it, every early morning, every library book, every chain-link fence, every cold piece of toast, had arrived at 12 words delivered quietly into a silent room. She thought about how long things take to become what they are, and she thought, some answers are not found. They are built, one question at a time, over years, in private, without applause, until the day the room goes silent, and you finally put them down. 3 months after Sanders Theater, Damian Musk enrolled at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. Not MIT, not Harvard. At Caltech, a place where roughly 2,300 students sit on a small, sun-warmed campus in the San Gabriel Valley and spend their days working on problems that do not yet have names. He chose it because it was serious, without being loud about being serious. Because the campus had a quietness to it that reminded him of the library at the West Side Academy. Because when he visited and walked through the halls and sat in on a lecture on computational neuroscience, he had felt the particular feeling he always chased. The feeling of being in a room that was bigger on the inside than it looked from the outside. He moved into a dormitory room in Avery House on a Sunday morning in September. He brought 3 boxes. 2 were books. 1 was everything else. His mother helped him carry them up. Justine Wilson, at 48, I was still the kind of person who insisted on carrying the heavy box herself, and then pretended it hadn't been heavy. She made up his bed with the sheets she had brought from home. Blue, plain, the same kind he had always used, while he arranged his books on the narrow shelf above the desk. She stood in the doorway before she left. She looked at him the way mothers look at children, at the precise moment they understand that the looking is going to be different from here on, that the dailiness of it is over, that what comes next is something larger and less familiar and out of their hands. "Are you ready?" she asked. He looked at his books, his desk, the window that faced a small courtyard where 2 students were already sitting on the grass with laptops, doing what students do on the first day before the work truly begins, looking relaxed and feeling everything but. "No," he said. She smiled. "Good." She held him for a long moment in the doorway. He let her. Then she walked down the hall, and he listened to her footsteps until they were gone. He sat down at the desk. He opened his notebook, the same kind he had always used, narrow-ruled, plain, dark cover, to the first clean page. At the top of the page, he wrote the date. September 7th, 2026. Below it he wrote a question, a new one he had never asked before. One that had been forming slowly, the way questions form when you have finally finished carrying an old answer, and your hands are free again. He looked at it for a moment. Then he opened the first book on his reading list. Number 1 of a new list, a 122 entries long. And he began. Outside his window, the California light was warm and flat and even. The 2 students on the grass had stopped looking at their laptops and were talking, leaning toward each other with the particular intensity of people who have just discovered they are interested in the same impossible thing. Somewhere in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Sanders Theater sat empty and cool and quiet, the way old wooden rooms sit between the things that happen inside them, holding the shape of the sound long after the sound itself has gone. Somewhere in Providence, Dorothy Osei was teaching a reading group at her local library. 3rd graders. She was asking them what they thought a word meant before she told them. She always did it that way. Somewhere in Akron, Ohio, a man who had once worked a factory line had a grandson who was brilliant, and the grandson was still becoming what he was going to be, and nobody had measured it yet. And in a small room in Pasadena, a boy with a notebook kept reading. The question at the top of the page waited. That was enough. That had always been enough. In November 2026, 8 months after the symposium, Dr. Renwick Hale walked into a classroom at Harvard for the first lecture of his new course. The course was called The Limits of Measurement. It had not existed before. He had designed it himself over the summer. In the particular way he designed things, slowly, carefully, without rushing toward the conclusion before the foundation was ready. The syllabus ran to 11 pages. The reading list included Stephen Jay Gould. It included Claude Steele. And it included a short paper on the limitations of standardized testing by a 19-year-old writer whose name appeared in the bibliography the same way every other name appeared, without special treatment, without footnote, without explanation. He did not mention this to anyone. He did not need to. The classroom held 32 students, graduate students mostly, a few advanced undergraduates, all of them carrying the particular energy of people who had signed up for something because it felt true, rather than because it looked good on a record. He stood at the front of the room. He looked at them. He thought, briefly, about a boy standing at the edge of a spotlight, about the stillness of him, about 11 seconds of silence in a room full of people who expected him to fall and watched him, instead, simply stand. And he set his notes on the lectern. "I want to begin," Dr. Renwick Hale said, "with a question." He paused. "What is the single greatest obstacle to human intelligence?" The room shifted. Several students glanced at each other. One or two smiled carefully, recognizing the words, unsure of the territory they were entering. He let the silence sit. He let it breathe. He let it do what silence does when you stop being afraid of it, when you stop filling it with noise just to prove you have something to say. "Take your time," he said quietly. And then something happened that he had not anticipated and could not have planned for. A young woman in the third row, 23 years old, a first-year graduate student from Lagos named Adaeze Okorie, and who had never heard of Sanders Theater, and had signed up for the course because the title had caught her eye in the catalog, raised her hand. He nodded at her. She thought for one more moment. Then she said something. It was not the same 12 words. It was her own words, found in her own way, shaped by her own years and her own fence and her own notebook, whatever form those things took in her particular life. But it pointed at the same place. It always does. That is the thing about true things. They are not owned by the person who first says them out loud. They belong to everyone who has ever sat quietly long enough to find them. They surface in libraries and classrooms and soccer fields and dormitory rooms and factory towns. And they surface in the minds of 9-year-olds who read books meant for adults and 10-year-olds who write decisions in careful handwriting at chain-link fences. They wait, patient and unhurried and permanent, until someone is finally still enough to hear them. Dr. Renwick Hale looked at the young woman in the third row. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, and the class began. And that was the end of the story. A boy with a notebook, a professor with a perfect record, and 12 words that neither of them will ever forget. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Drop your city, your country, your corner of the world in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think or feel, or remember something true about yourself, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second. It means everything. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story like this one. We show up here regularly with stories that actually matter. Finally, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear it today. A friend who doubts themselves. A child who has been told they are not enough. A parent who needs reminding that quiet kids carry the deepest answers. Share it and help us spread a little more kindness and awareness in a world that could always use more of both. We will see you in the next story.